Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. Time for another show, despite the fact that I'm just not fully recovered today. But I don't know. I just felt like I should get back on the air, I guess. Plus, we'll have Greg, of course, in order to help us out through most of the first hour. Or I could just say, you do the show today, Greg, and forget all the obligations and errands that you have to do, and you can just take care of mine. But it probably won't work out that way. But at any rate, I'm not in the same sort of discomfort that I was yesterday. I apologize to you for having to miss yesterday's show, but though I was still stuffy and congested, today we just have to deal with sounding funny. Yesterday was like painful. You don't need to know all the details. Fingers crossed that it's not COVID. I mean, it's not consistent with most of what I've seen people report as their symptoms, but hey, things are weird. I don't know. And I was thinking about going to get a test yesterday. And of course, as it turns out, I didn't find out until afterwards that there was like one of those free large-scale testing events yesterday, like right near my house, too. There's a couple of, CVS's and Walgreens and things that I could go to. And I don't know, I guess you have to pay a couple bucks and get tested. Although tests are in short supply, as it turns out, so they don't just give them to anybody anymore. And that's actually quite a huge problem. And like this far into the pandemic, we really should be doing better on that, I think. Other countries, UK, I believe, is sending people home testing kits and just sending to every house a pack of 7 or 10 of these, rapid home tests, which sounds like an excellent idea, just generally, not just because I wonder whether I have it. But anyway, news from the West Coast, where Justice, who runs the board behind the scenes and, of course, follows up our show with like the actual news in case we don't get to it, although most days that Greg's on here, we usually do get to the news. But doing okay, but I guess still backup content for his show today, so we wish him well and his mom as well, hopefully improving. Sounds like things are getting a little bit better. We worry about both of you. We worry about this crazy disease and what it's doing to people. And look, fingers crossed. He says he's getting the Regeneron. I don't know whether it's the Regeneron or could be the Eli Lilly version of things, but the monoclonal therapy shots coming online for Justice. So this is good. We've been waiting for someone to deliver on this stuff for quite a while. States are, in fact, handing it out, and that's good news. Hopefully it'll help and turn things around. And what can you do? I don't know. Just on the other hand, I think about those things nightly because I count the number of people who get into serious trouble and die from COVID while waiting for the miracle cure. It's great that states have gotten a supply. It's great that the federal government has provided the states with that supply. But it's still a far cry from Trump arriving back from Walter Reed Hospital and making a video of himself on the White House lawn saying, 1, that Regeneron is a cure, and 2, that he would use the military, deploy the military to deliver it to everyone in the United States who needed it. That's not what has happened since, and we are approaching 500,000 additional deaths from COVID since he made that promise. It doesn't sound or feel to me like he's delivered on that promise, but your mileage may vary. And look, if you're in need of it and it gets to you, bravo. I could even stomach crediting Trump for that if you could prove that it was the case, as opposed to, well, we're now 8 months, I guess, into the Biden presidency. It could very well be the case that it was the Biden administration that delivered those monoclonal therapies to Oregon. But we'll withhold judgment on that until, well, first of all, let's wait and see how the things work. And fingers crossed that they go well. Lots of other things to catch up on. Of course, COVID still tops in the news, and that will likely be reflected in Greg's roundup today, though there's plenty going on inside the house as well. entering the final stages of the struggle for supremacy, I suppose, between this moderate wing that, for some reason, though no one knows exactly what it is other than habit, would like to see all of this spending whittled down, versus the progressive wing, which I think rightly feels that they had a deal in place and that the moderates are reneging on the deal for no particular reason. And, well, if they feel like the deal is being pulled out from under them, they may just pull out of the deal themselves. There's lots going on elsewhere. By the way, terrible week for Facebook as well. And I'll be pleased to share some of that news with you today and throughout the week. Really time for us to give up on that thing. I know it'll be difficult for some people who have a lot invested in their Facebook presence and probably not that much to lose in terms of the loss of their personal data, maybe. But, I know that bothers people quite a bit in principle, even if they aren't either targeted or the information about them is readily available elsewhere. We don't really know. But, the bad news mounts for them. Lots of great investigative reporting out there, uncovering all sorts of very interesting documents, both through litigation and intrepid reporting as well. But let's see. Greg is joining us now, and I really ought to make use of every second that he's available to me. Good morning, Greg. How are you today?
Good morning. We'll try to save your voice. Of course, you could always gargle with betadine. That's the new ivermectin.
Cool.
I don't know if you know that.
Yes, I've heard about that, and I'm just tickled to find out where you can find the stuff.
Don't do it. Don't do
Yeah,
it.
in case you thought he was serious.
I'm just funning with David here, trying to save his voice.
Yeah, well, I do have a listener recommended gargle handy somewhere, but I don't know if it's not pleasant. So anyway,
a very, very good friend of mine was worried that they might have just recently gotten COVID because they were exposed.
I worry about this.
Got tested and was negative, but is still feeling under the weather. And I say that because it's a reminder that the usual school illnesses that happen this time of year are happening this time of year.
Yeah.
So there's regular old coronaviruses, there's colds, a little bit early for flu season, but not too early to get your shot. For those of you who are believers in trying to decrease the amount of illness you get, influenza vaccines are available. Remember, they don't make you flu-proof. COVID vaccines don't make you COVID-proof. They just help with everything. So, just a public service announcement, time to make sure your shots are up to date. Which shots? FDA is still looking at boosters and trying to figure out what to do there. There is new news that 2 J&J shots work better than 1. And also, there's old news that an mRNA that follows a J&J works better than J&J. So it's likely that that's going to be recommended at some time relatively soon. And for now, despite Biden's plan to vaccinate everybody with a booster, the FDA looks like it's going with over 65 and high risk, however you define it. That still leaves a lot of people who are eligible to get it.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, it's a good place to start. And I know they're still wrestling with the idea of should we be trying to get people first doses here, elsewhere, around the world, etc. I don't know. If the first round of shots was any experience, basically they ought to just lay it out there. Anybody who's willing to take it should grab it.
I'm still of the belief that CDC and our public health agencies aren't great on messaging. But I'm also increasingly of the belief that the public just doesn't want to get it. That is to say, they're looking for certainty when certainty doesn't exist, or they just ignore everything that public health people say, which is the case of the Trump people and the anti-vaxxers. Yes. But for those who are on the fence, just like politics, most of them aren't paying attention, so I wouldn't get too excited about, the messaging drove them to Actually, they're not paying attention to the messaging because they don't pay attention to anything else. But at the same time, those who do pay attention get really miffed about nuance because they want certainty. It's the old, you said we shouldn't wear masks, and now you do. Well, things changed, and so we changed our opinion. Well, you said everybody was going to get a booster. Yeah, but the science people spent hours, days, a full day, looking at it, and they were looking at it before the meeting. The meeting was a full day. And they decided, based on the nuance, that only certain people should get it now and that you're still relatively well protected. Well, that's not what I wanted to hear, because I wanted to hear you tell me, here's what you have to do and just do it. And you're making it complicated. And it's funny because a lot of the biggest complaints about the public health messaging is from the political consultants. I want it simple so I could tell our audience, okay, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. But that wasn't totally correct, and it really got Obama into trouble when he said it. Yeah, but it was a simple message. Okay, well, sometimes simple messages aren't exactly what's going on here.
Right.
So, like every White House task force, you have to balance what's actually going on with nuance with a simple message that people can understand. And you have people in both camps arguing about what's the best way to craft it, and it is not easy.
Well, messaging isn't easy. And by the way, political consultants, I thought you got big bucks because the stuff was hard. So, if it's going to be easy and everything's supposed to be easy, I think we should pay you less.
Right. Now, you have a novel virus, and even after a year, we still don't understand a whole lot about it. One of the things we don't understand, for example, we talked about this, I think, last time, or if not the time before that, is what's the exact role of people who have already been sick, but you haven't proven that they've been sick? Or those who have been sick and you have proven it, what are they supposed to do? And at the same time, what are you supposed to do with kids who clearly don't get as sick as often as adults and yet still get sick and wind up in the ICU? And so, the message there is, children are different than adults. They've always been different than adults. They're not just little adults, as pediatricians are fond of saying.
The same, though.
And so you have to treat them differently. And also, you can look at 680 some odd deaths and say, well, that's more people that died than during the 1917-18 pandemic flu. If that's the flu you thought that COVID was like, you're right. I said that way back. Don't compare it to flu. Well, yeah, compare it to flu. Compare it to 1918 flu.
Oh, now you have to change.
Now we can have the comparison. On the other hand, remember, the U.S. was only a third as big. So 1918 flu in proportion was worse. But that doesn't make 680,000 deaths better. Any more than looking at 500 some odd pediatric deaths and saying, oh, it's not 680,000. What are you worried about?
Yes.
500 pediatric deaths is a big effing deal.
It is.
3 are.
Right.
You get stuff recalled for that.
Right. All sorts of things will be off the menu if 3 kids die from it. Yeah, I saw a screen cap last night. I guess Laura Ingraham spent her time saying 555 kids have died from COVID. How many kids are there in this country? I mean, come on.
Let's have 550
We've got plenty more where that's
on this show. And
kill all you want. We'll make more. Yeah. Right. Of course, the minute it becomes one of their kids, then of course it's a serious issue. But, I thought that was pretty callous. And but
said the person who's required to be vaccinated to work there.
Yes, right. That's true. Maybe we should have that be the case for more popular TV shows. And it is in real life on the set where they shoot your favorite TV programs. They do require everybody be vaccinated, and they should do that. And they should make that an element of the show, or at least the reality shows, like on The Bachelor or something. You can only, be interviewed to be picked by The Bachelor if you get vaccinated on the air or something. I think they should do something like that. That would probably popularize it more than our other programs.
Well, in any case, where we're at in the country right now with the pandemic is that the case numbers are starting to drop a little bit. We probably have hit peak, and it'll probably drop between now and November. And whether or not there'll be a wave after that remains to be seen. Very nice piece here from Helen Branswell, one of the excellent health reporters at Stat News. Winter's coming again. What to expect from COVID-19 as the season looms. And that's not just Game of Thrones. A year ago, experts warned that the U.S. faced a grim winter if Americans didn't mask up and social distance to slow transmission. Now, indoor weather again looms in many parts of the country. Remember, indoor weather means people get together. People getting together means spread.
Yes.
One of the many reasons why, flu season in a normal year, RSV season in a normal year, tends to be in the colder months. The highly transmissible Delta variant is driving spread even among fully vaccinated people. Children are back in classrooms that can function as germ incubators because that's what kids are good at. And as you walk around in public, you see noses poking out of masks, masks under chins, faces that are mask-free. So what should we expect? Well, Jeff Dushin, one of the best public health people in terms of both knowledge, implementation, and messaging, health officer for the Seattle and King County Public Health Department, says the bottom line is, I think, uncertainty.
Yes. Okay.
Right? They've been experiencing it from the beginning, and he says we're experiencing a new virus, newly emerged pathogen. We're trying to fight it with new tools that we don't have a lot of experience with, and we're dealing with unpredictable human behavior, which is a very important factor, and environmental factors that may influence the severity of COVID outbreaks and how well it transmits. And there's a lot of moving parts. So among them, the questions of when COVID vaccines will be approved for kids, what percentage of parents will agree, and what happens now. The high crest of Delta transmission is subsiding in some parts of the country, as they have in countries where Delta took off before it did in the U.S. 9 modeling efforts by the NIH suggest that by the end of November, the Delta wave will have waned and new cases will be down at quite a low level. How low? Down to where we were in late June and July, when we thought that things were relatively under control. Now, some of us said, we're not done. We said that. It happened. We're still not done. It still could come back. But every day, more and more people are vaccinated, so that's going to be a huge help.
Yeah.
So what's next? We're probably going to stay there because there's quite a bit of immunity in the population, and that's good. But other people think, no, actually it's going to go back up because people are going to get together after Thanksgiving, and then the kids are going to continue to spread. Right. And could be. One prediction is Delta still has a lot more energy in it. I think we should expect more ups and downs, says one of the experts. I think we should expect more peaks and troughs. I think the peaks could become less lofty, potentially, but the peaks will be very sharp in specific populations, and we have to watch for that.
Okay, that makes a certain amount of sense. But as long as there's this many people not getting vaccinated or this many breakthrough
right. The next thing you know, it'll be only evangelical churches. Certain populations that refuse the vaccine are going to be eligible, let's say.
Yes, okay. Or low-hanging fruit, I've called them in the past, or targets of the neutron bomb for morons as well, but the nicest way to say it is if you're resisting doing anything that will slow the spread, you are likely to be a part of that spread and faster.
Right. Now, if we're lucky, it'll actually continue to mutate in a way good for humans. Because if it tries to be more virulent, it may become less infectious, or there could be another variant that's even more infectious and easily spread than Delta. We don't know that, but that's less likely. But you can't guarantee anything. So get your vaccination, and that's why COVID is still job number one. It's what people look for the government to help with. It affects the economy, and the economy obviously affects presidential ratings. And so all of that is important and something we need to keep an eye on. Now, right now, the Democrats are still trying to work out what the heck they're trying to do with the moderates and progressives trying to decide about reconciliation and infrastructure. Yes. And it's complicated by the fact that we're also careening toward a shutdown, as Washington Post puts it, financial crisis, congressional stalemate, the usual stuff that Democrats are very good at. As Josh Dorner tweeted, things in D.C. are on a high wire right now. The stakes are extremely high, but people forget how many near-death experiences the Affordable Care Act had and the extremely divergent views and basically everything that had to be reconciled. We can do this. Biden isn't ignoring it. He's got a whole bunch of moderates and progressive plus senators at the White House today to talk to them a little bit about, making sure the whole thing doesn't go down, because everybody has an agenda that they want. It seems like the moderates really, 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 really don't want reconciliation because they don't want to change the social experience. And so that's something that's going to happen, and they probably want that not to happen even more than they want infrastructure to happen, which is one of the reasons why they're at loggerheads right at the moment. Jonathan Cohen writes in Huffington Post, why a transformation of caregiving could be Biden's BFD. It would cost a lot of money, but there's reason for that. Democrats in Congress are feverishly put together what could be the most ambitious piece of domestic legislation in several decades. Remember, most people who are covering the gameplay, the gamesmanship about what's going on with the different factions and different parties in Congress, as is usually the case, forget to tell you about what's in the damn thing to begin with. So they skip policy. They don't tell you that. We will, because this is Kagro in the morning and we do that.
Yes.
Democrats in Congress are feverishly putting together what could be the most ambitious piece of domestic legislation. But you probably haven't heard much about what the bill will actually do, writes Jonathan Cohen, except maybe that it would require a lot of new government spending. That's partly because it feels like such a collection of disconnected elements, but some of the proposals are connected in an important, potentially transformative way. They would create a new pillar of the welfare state that could alter everyday life in the same way New Deal and Great Society did. It would be a big effing deal, as Joe Biden famously described. But this time, the BFD would be a revolution in federal support of caregiving. Three main components. One's an initiative to provide up to 3 months of paid leave to take care of family members, including newborns. Another is a proposal to make child care and pre-kindergarten available to any family that wants it. And the third piece is a proposal to fund what are known as home and community-based services, a clunky piece of policy speak that refers to programs that allow disabled and elderly Americans to live on their own rather than in nursing homes.
That feels so moderate popular.
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah.
And like everybody's constituency would want this.
The sandwich generation, as everyone keeps insisting.
There are conservative Democrats who describe themselves as moderates, but they're really conservative Democrats who are simply opposed to paying for social safety net. When you get down to it, that they don't like it, troubling. They don't want it. And so in order to convince them, you either have to make it in their own interest, which is to say show that it's popular with their constituents, or give them something else that they really want. And again, as I said, a lot of these guys, because they're all disparate, they're all different. Another article about that. This one's in Roll Call. Moderate Democrats not monolithic about their budget concerns. Right. Somebody like Kurt Schrader, Oregon representative, who said, I'm not going to vote for anything with reconciliation, a Democrat. He just doesn't want this stuff. And you can't give him anything that he wants as much as he hates this.
Right. And that's different from others. Yeah, I've been troubled by this whole thing. Carolyn Bordeaux. I mean, I know Carolyn. She's not like that. Or she wasn't.
No, she's got other different reasons.
Yeah, it's just doesn't make any sense to me. And like, I'm so surprised to find her among this group, but I think it's purely political.
Josh Gottheimer, New Jersey, Carolyn Bordeaux, Georgia, Jim Costa, California, Jared Golden of Maine, Henry Cuellar, Philemon Vela, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas. They appreciate all the work, but with Stephanie Murphy from Florida, Kathleen Rice in New York, these are among the people that are going to the White House today. Some of them just don't like the price tag, like Manchin. Some of them don't like the concept, like Schrader. Some of them don't like the idea that somehow or other this is all tied up with other things they don't like the fiscal stuff, because they don't want fiscal cliffs to be in this. A lot of the centrists say we're not going to put our neck on the line until you can guarantee me the Senate's going to do something. So we're talking to Manchin, and they're not happy with it, so we're not happy with it. I mean, it's all a different group of why we don't like it. And so this is for Pelosi and Schumer, but in this particular case, we're talking about the House, Pelosi and Biden, to really corral the folks and say, look, this is what you're going to get. This is what we have to do. And some of this you're not going to like. And the alternative is to see the whole thing go down in flames. You get nothing. Biden's agenda goes down, and you don't get reelected. Yeah.
Well, that's the one that'll worry them. The last one.
And so that, happens at the last minute. And so it looks bad at the moment, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it winds up. What you could predict is what we predicted Monday, which is the size of the $3.5 trillion top line is going to be lower.
Yes.
Kurt Schrader wants it to be $1 trillion. Right? Manchin wants to be 1.5. Hawaii Representative Ed Case doesn't want to limit the duration of programs because he says that hides the true cost. So he doesn't want to give the illusion of balance in order to get this thing passed.
Yeah, but that can't happen in reconciliation. Everything is
right.
Got a 10-year window.
Everything's 10 years by definition, right? So, he wants things that can't happen because I'm saying that. Some of these guys are just not that bright.
How about a nice Hawaiian punch?
They're not that smart. They don't get it. They either want a posture or they're hoping that as this passes with no more than 3 votes to spare, they're one of the two. and positioning like
Yes,
Kurt
that's
Schrader
right.
says, I'm one of the two that'll vote no. We'll still pass it. So like, get off my case. And case says, I am the case, and I want to be one of the two. And then somebody else says, well, I want to be one of the two as well. Well, you can only have two. So,
no problem.
One of you guys is going to lose.
I guess so. All right. Well, Schrader. Why do I know him? Well, he's a constant pain in the ass, I think. Wasn't he the guy that didn't show up for swearing in because he scheduled his wedding and honeymoon right for like the beginning of I think that was him. Maybe last time around.
Yeah,
anyway,
maybe. I mean,
weird thing to do.
Yeah, not like
Are
these
you
guys
busy
that
in
you guys
January?
want.
Yes, you are. Don't have your wedding then.
So, it's complicated. And,
Yes.
you got professionals who are trying to hold this all together, and in the end they may, but it won't be easy. And I think Pelosi's message this week is basically, stop putting your lines in the sand in public because you're only locking yourself into something that then you'll feel like you have to save face on. And saving face is the next most important thing to getting reelected. These guys aren't policy folks. They're interested in getting reelected first and saving face second, and then maybe if they have time, they'll look at policy.
Yeah, I guess so. And that too is another thing that sort of sets Carolyn Bordeaux apart. I mean, she actually is a bit of a policy wonk, so I'm just surprised by this whole thing. But I would
Which
like
doesn't
to
mean that, she may
yeah.
be one of the few of the 9 or 10 that's simply saying, I want certain things, give them to me and I'm on board.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to read through. And of course, the whole thing is colored by, well, you made this point several times. I'm a policy wonk and I would like to initiate policies, but I can only do that if I'm
Elected.
Here. Right, yeah, elected and part of this gang. So, yeah, that's a legit concern. But, I'd love to read through this. We'll piece through it, but not right away, because first we take a break.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Good question from Greg during the break. When am I going to go get a test? I'm going now. So, Greg, you're on. Tell him some stories, and today I'll be able to go maybe to one of the local drugstores. I have to research them individually. They all have different policies on whether or not they will require an appointment and whether they will give you a test if you just ask for it, or do you have to have in some cases a doctor's order, but I won't go to those. And some they're looking for certain symptoms, and I don't know whether the ones I have are enough or what, but I'll look up what else I have to have, and I'll say, oh, I've got that. Give me a test, I guess. I don't know. Not sure whether that's one of those things you're allowed to lie a little bit about or not, like boosters.
Yeah, I mean, one of the symptoms could be, depression over the fact that Congress takes too long to Congress, but that's not going to get you a test.
No? All right. Well, I'll come up with something. I haven't coughed, but I could do that. I could try it.
Can you taste coffee?
Yeah.
That's good.
So, yeah, I mean, so far, it really just doesn't seem, it seems most consistent with, like fall allergies, to be honest. But, well, you never know, and I don't want to do it. But I work alone here, so it's kind of okay. I don't feel the same pressure. But I would like to know, because eventually I'm going to have to interact with people, and if I have COVID, I will tell them to stay away.
Yeah, you have family, so it's nice to know. Right. So this item caught my eye. Yes. Nathaniel Rakic, who is a 538 politics writer.
Oh, okay.
Tweeted last night, quite the drama in Oregon. State House Democrats have gone back on their deal to give Republicans a say in redistricting in order to prevent them from paralyzing the legislature by walking out. They had gotten a equal deal because we expect you to be responsible adults, and the Republicans didn't like the results because it wasn't good enough for them, so they didn't want to be responsible adults. So Democrats said, okay, deal's off, and the Republicans are furious.
All right.
So
I like
the
that.
way Nathaniel Rekich writes it up says, House Democrats were initially criticized as pushovers for rewarding the GOP's walkout tactics, but if this was the plan all along, it was actually pretty cunning and cutthroat of them.
Was it?
Yeah, well, look, you want a chance to be responsible? Here you are. Well, we're not going to be responsible. Okay, well, we change the deal. We can because we're in the majority. Wait, you can't do that. Well, actually, we can, and we did.
All right. Good.
And in fact, instead of just doing it directly where we look like we're pushing everybody around and being bullies, we look like the responsible adults who gave you the chance and you blew it, so now it's on you, and we get the same result we wanted anyway.
Do those guys have telephones or email or anything? Because I think that's the National Democratic plan on the debt ceiling, but we've tried this before and it doesn't seem to make a difference.
Because senators are different. Right? Senators ignore everybody. Besides, they're not even up for re-election, most of them.
Well, that's a big difference. True.
Right? So Nathaniel Rekich goes on to say, in response, Republicans could still walk out to block the 5-1 Democratic congressional map.
Ooh.
But they may not want to. Because if they do that, then drawing legislative maps, for the state falls to the Democratic Secretary of State. So if you don't want to participate, that means you're not participating altogether.
All right.
And then we'll do it alone. So you have your chance. You don't like 5-1? How does 6-0 sound?
Yeah, I wonder if they could make that happen. Well, if they don't like being pushed around like that and don't like partisan redistricting in favor of the majority party, maybe they shouldn't do it so much in other states. But, okay. Well, fine by me. Sauces, geese, ganders, etc. Is there... Well, I'm looking at that
there's some
piece.
Lessons there.
I see the Statesman
there's nothing
Journal
wrong with
piece. Is that who we're
cooperating, at
talking
least
about?
at first, as long as you have a plan B.
Okay. Do they? Do we?
I don't,
Whose plan is this?
Their plan B was,
Lost.
okay, we'll do it ourselves.
Oh, all right.
Now, in terms of congressional, I don't know. I hope so.
Okay. I hope so. Yeah, that ceiling thing. Quite annoying. I looked over the break yesterday at how long I've been saying you can and probably should do debt ceiling work under reconciliation. And apparently it's 10 years. Since July, at least on Twitter, since July of 2011, I've been saying, by the way, you could just do this under reconciliation, and that would save you a lot of heartache.
Right.
So 10 years we've been trying to get the Republicans to act responsibly on the debt ceiling and do their part the way we do our part when it's them in charge. And that has not sunk in with anybody.
I was not on the show yesterday. Did you spend any time on Trump lawyer John Eastman's 6-point plan for Vice President Pence to overturn the election?
I didn't. But
I think
it's a
we
good
should.
thing to do. Okay, sure. That would be a good thing for today. Let's do it.
Okay.
Did you read it?
So here's the 6-point plan advanced by Trump lawyer John Eastman for Vice President Pence to overturn the election.
It's a good plan. I mean, bad outcome. Good plan. Yeah.
Point number 1. Vice President Pence, presiding over the joint session, or Senate pro tempore Grassley, if Pence recuses himself, begins to open and count the ballots, starting with Alabama.
Yes, that's what you would do.
Okay. When he gets to Arizona, because, start with A's.
Right.
Before you go to the Deltas and Mu's. When he gets to Arizona, he announces that he has multiple slates of electors and so is going to defer decision on that until finishing the other states.
Yes, he doesn't, but he will announce that.
At the end, he announces that because of the ongoing disputes in 7 states, there are no electors that can be deemed validly appointed, and that means the total number of electors appointed, which is the language of the 12th Amendment, is 454. A majority of the electors appointed would therefore be 228, and there are at this point 232 votes for Trump, and so Trump wins.
That was their idea.
That was their plan. That was their ideal plan.
Yes,
right?
that's the short version.
Howells, of course, from the Democrats in this memo, who now claim, contrary to Lawrence Tribe's prior position, that 270 is required. So Pence is fine. Pursuant to the 12th Amendment, no candidate has achieved the necessary majority. So the matter goes to the House, where you take state by state. Republicans currently control 26 of the states, so Trump wins there as well.
Yeah.
And one last piece, assuming the Electoral Count Act process is followed, and upon getting the objections to the Arizona slates, the two houses break into their separate chambers. So we should not allow the Electoral Count Act constraint on debate to control this. That would mean that a prior legislature was determining the rules of the present one. So somebody like Rand Paul should demand normal rules, which includes a filibuster, which creates a stalemate that would give the state legislatures more time to weigh in formally on what they want to do. And the main thing here, he writes, is that Pence should do this without asking for permission. No votes.
Now that sounds Republican. Yes.
Let the other side challenge his actions.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is the Constitution assigns this power to the VP as the ultimate arbiter. We should take all of our actions with that in mind. So that was his plan.
Yes.
Okay. And the thing is, he's director of the Claremont Institute Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence. He still has a job. People still put him on boards. They still invite him to dinner.
Yeah.
And the guy's an insurrectionist.
Well, that's true.
I just thought I would point that out. That to me is as important as his legalese thinking, which, doesn't make any sense. But that was their plan. They had an explicit plan for a coup.
Yes.
That's the news.
I felt like we read that plan ahead of time. And I'm not certain what the provenance of the plan is, but I felt like in late October, mid-October, I began to read articles in, I don't know which one it was, Slate, Salon, the Daily Beast, who knows, where people were, although they were Democratic-leaning writers, writing about it as a nightmare scenario. And they didn't have it at 7 states doing this, but I think they were focusing, say, on Pennsylvania with a closer division of the Electoral College, and that maybe just invalidating Pennsylvania or one other state would throw it into the same sort of chaos. So they were talking about the same things, and I'm not certain whether Eastman was talking early about this or everybody came up with this plan.
I think people were sussing it out based on their actions, because, how else could this have worked? Why did they think it was going to work? What was the whole point of the January 6th march? What did they think was going to happen? And this is what they thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, how do we know that? Well, it's the only thing that makes sense. Well, that's not enough. Okay, well, here's a memo spelling it out.
Yes. I saw 2 versions of the memo. The 6-point short version of the memo got everybody outraged. And then they were more outraged when they saw the longer, I don't know what it was, 3-page version of this memo. The longer version of the memo had more problems in it. But the short version of the memo, it was very interesting. I'll say that. It also had some weird inconsistencies in it, but also that's just if you look past the idea of, well, you don't really have this power, but why don't you just say you have this power and then do it, and then and then
fight me.
Yeah, and then when Democrats say, no, we should have a vote, don't have a vote. That is a little problematic. I thought that was interesting that he was saying the Electoral Count Act procedures shouldn't prevail because that would be a past Congress binding a current Congress with old dead rules, and they should use the actual Senate rules, which would include a filibuster, and so therefore they could delay everything. But one of the big arguments about allowing the continuance of the filibuster is that those are rules adopted by an old Senate, and there's no reason why the old rules should bind a current legislature. So the same argument gets used to say, well, we should throw out some old rules, but just not all the old rules. The ones we like, we keep. Well, that's problematic.
As you've taught me since 10 years ago when I first started coming on the show, if you have the gavel in your hands, you can make the rules be what you need them to be.
You can try, yeah. Well, Pence apparently not particularly.
And there's a great example.
That's good
well,
news.
Old rules from the old legislator don't apply here except if we think they do. Who says so? I do. Fight me.
Yeah, the problem was Eastman didn't have a gavel, so it was just an idea, which I'm a little less alarmed about his throwing out weird ideas about using rules to the max, because I've done that, but then again, I'm not invited to any dinners and I'm not on any boards either. But It's
but
not
Pence
dissimilar.
didn't go for it, and again,
Right.
one of the reasons Pence didn't go for it is
Biden
they didn't
didn't
think
go
it
for
would
any
work,
mine either.
and he got the opinion from people like Dan Quayle,
Yeah.
PhD in politics,
PhD.
Potatoe, and he said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Even if I'd like to do it, and I get the rationale here, I can't do it. But
Yeah,
I'm going to run
right.
for president under the Republican banner next time anyway.
True.
And hopefully people will forget because,
Right. No more hanging Pence.
if the short-term plan for most politicians is do what I need to do to get reelected and then save face, the longer-term plan for most politicians is whatever I did or you said I did, I'm banking on the fact that you won't remember.
He's got a lot to bank on people forgetting. I mean, like people keep pointing out, the idea that he's going to win the nomination of the Hang Pence party seems far-fetched. But there were definitely people, I know Republicans, who never said they wanted to hang Mike Pence. So there's definitely a couple of them out there.
Right. The thing is that the Republican Party is a minority party, and you need every one of the Hang Pence people in order to win.
Right.
And so how do you win them over when they want to hang you? I guess you have to say something like, I'm running, you should nominate me, and then I'll let you hang me after I win. We have a deal.
That's a possibility.
And they'll say, no.
Yeah.
We have to do them together, just like the Democrats do. We have
Right,
to
the
elect
timing
you and
is the
hang
thing.
you. You can't do time. Or if you want the timing, we insist that hanging comes first, and then we'll elect you.
Yes, but the Senate says, well, first we'll hang him, then we'll elect him.
Yes, well, that's not good
That's
enough.
the way it
We
should work.
want to do it in tandem. Otherwise, you don't have our votes.
We're just going to hang him a little bit.
Sometimes this whole construct of doing things together, breaks down in silliness when you try to apply it to something else. And here's a perfect example.
It's a real interesting memo, the set of memos. And by the way, the longer memo made things worse. I mean, everybody kind of pointed that out. But the longer memo started out with the wrong premise, which was, I guess he was trying to explain how it would come to pass that Pence, upon picking up the electors from Arizona, would say, oh, I have several slates here. I have competing slates. That's highly questionable, too. My big question about the whole plan when we were analyzing it in October, November, December, and beginning of January before they were trying to execute it was, I don't know how you're going to get those slates there. I know that fake slates of Republican electors gathered in the states and purported to send their electoral votes to Washington. The question is, like, right at the base level of the mailroom, like, do they forward this mail to the vice president or not? And I'm not certain that they do. So I'm not sure how they were going to get those slates unless it was Pence, like, smuggling them in himself and then trying to, like, surreptitiously throw them into the pile and say, how did this get here? Wow, there's two slates. So that was weird and problematic. Then in the longer memo, Eastman makes the same mistake that they made in one of their spectacularly failed post-election lawsuits, which was to claim that the reason that there were competing slates was that these 7 states had illegally and unconstitutionally, usurped the power of the state legislature to determine the manner in which their electors would be selected. And they went to court with that, and they got killed with it. The idea being there that, well, the Constitution says the state legislatures determine the manner of choosing the electors. And the problem is that manner just means the legislature shall say, we'll either have an election or a coin toss or a dance-off or whatever it is. The winner of that gets to be a part of the Electoral College. But that's it. That's as far as the manner goes. It's the Republican contention that if you lengthen voting hours in the state, that has to be done by an act of the legislature, and that's just not true. That's just an awful assumption. And the whole thing is based on that. But he left that out of the short memo. Well, the short memo was better, but the long memo starts out with a huge mistake and goes from there. So anyway, it's full of holes. It's fun to watch people discover this stuff, though, and it was and I'm glad they think poorly of Eastman. You should. but for other reasons.
Right. So the last thing I'm going to cover before I go is an interesting piece by Dave Dian, D-Day in the old days on Daily Kos.
Ah, yes. Okay.
The great supply shock we brought upon ourselves. A half-century of neglecting fragilities in production and a confluence of disruptions have brought us to this point. Things are cheaper when you have just-in-time stocking. But just-in-time stocking is really prone to disruption for things like hurricanes. And in fact, Dave wrote a book about it.
Oh,
and he was talking about things like, why is it that if all the IV bags are made in Puerto Rico, something like a hurricane hitting Puerto Rico means you can't get IV bags anywhere in the country?
That seems a simpler problem than it was initially. You put that very well.
But it's everywhere for everything. Right? The companies making and transporting products have also concentrated their industries, building more fragility into the system.
Yes.
Okay. The philosophy of just-in-time production dictates that you profit more with fewer suppliers using economies of scale. They're monopoly shipping the goods too. And then if something happens that, for example, piles up the containers, you're in trouble. Or if you can't unload at a port because there's a strike, you're in trouble. And there's no alternatives is his point.
No. Although sometimes there are, but not to most of these things. As it turns out, there's a lot of ports, though. But this supply chain thing is a huge story. I'm so glad he took this up. He's got a book on this. I missed this book. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so let's
maybe
see
the
if
supply
I can
line of books broke down.
Find the book because he did have a book.
He's got
let's
books,
see.
no doubt.
A year ago, he says, I had the great misfortune of releasing a book that covered this in detail.
Why be prepared when you can?
And the book is. What is the name of the Monopolized Life in the Age of Corporate Power?
Okay. Oh, so part of the book, I guess, would be about this. How ironic that he was too early with his book about just-in-time delivery.
Right.
There's the problem.
So monopolies are why salt and water in a bag became a scarce item, because that's what in an IV bag. An excerpt from a new book on life in the age of corporate power. And he talks about how all this happened. So,
I will have to read that book.
It's just an important story. People should keep that in mind. So, in the meantime, while the Democrats are getting rid of the debt limit and fixing the government shutdown, as well as bringing reconciliation and the bilateral infrastructure bill together to advance Biden's agenda, which includes a lot of social service netting in there as they Congress. The other thing they should do, by the way, while they're at it, is fix the supply line issue.
They should do that. I don't know how.
They should do all of those things, and I'd really like it done by the end of the week because they just take too long to do stuff.
Well, if it's due at the end of the week, that means you can do it on Thursday for
Thursday
Friday
night.
delivery.
Should be very busy. Anyway, with that's kind of a semi-summary of what's been going on in the past couple of days. Yes, and I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk again.
Okay. That sounds like a good plan. But don't come here early. Come just in time.
Just in time.
All right. Now.
And don't overstay your welcome to.
Oh no, that can't be done. All right. Thanks very much. That carries us through most of the first hour, and I'll see how much of the rest I can fill in and what breaks down in between now and then.
Right. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Here's some just-in-time analysis from Kagro X, David Waldman. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. We'll do it again tomorrow. I am fascinated by this supply line stuff, although what's really been interesting is the number of people who have showed up right at this particular moment saying that they've been analyzing just-in-time delivery for a long time, and they have. But of course, here David's just the irony of having done it a year ago is just too much for me. But that's good progressive approach to the problem. See it coming, work it out, lay out a solution, have everybody forget that it's a problem between the time you finish publishing your solution and the time the problem manifests in ways that the majority of people actually recognize, like they don't have Minute Maid lemonade in cans at the supermarket anymore because XYZ reason. That really happened, by the way. And then everybody freaks out. But it has to be something that everybody notices. I don't think anybody noticed the lemonade thing except my son, who loves the Minute Maid lemonade in cans. And during the first 10 months of the pandemic, it was gone. It was just simply not available. And it was very weird. I don't know what goes in that stuff that they weren't able to get a hold of it. And because they were producing it in 2-liter bottles, but not in cans. So is it a can shortage? No, because there's cans of everything else all over the place. However, I did notice that like the Coca-Cola lines, my guess is that they, pared things down to their core products. We need to be able to make and can Coke, Diet Coke, maybe Coke Zero, something like that. And then the varietals of Coke after that began to disappear. The caffeine-free Coke started to disappear from the shelves, et cetera, et cetera. I should just read David's article about this. But I've been fascinated by that and listening to the production crew in the background when they do work here in the ICU ward with me, and hearing about shipping container logistics all the time and packaging logistics and stuff like that. Has raised awareness of it. And we shared an article, I don't know, what about like 3 weeks ago maybe, about somebody else observing breakdowns in the supply chain. Remember the story about the milk supplier and the milk jugs and worrying about where they were produced, all that stuff. It is fascinating. And maybe I should read through some of this stuff. But there's so many other things waiting for discovery here. And I hardly know where to begin. So I will do it at random. Let's see. I think our short discussion of the Eastman, the John Eastman memo actually kind of covered all the points I wanted to make. I wondered whether Armando wanted to discuss that or expand on it, but there were a number of problems with it. But I thought it was really interesting. I am of the view that, the partisan side of me, of course, to the extent it's possible to use the outrage over the discovery of this memo to hold top officials in the Trump administration accountable for their actions. I'm for that. But there wasn't anything so disturbing to me about Eastman's floating this plan. One, because, of course, I had read it before, but when the authors were Democrats, and they were saying, of course, this is outrageous, or this would be a huge stretch, but it's in a constitutional gray area where it seems like the answer should be, X, but there's no proof that it has to be X, and there's room for arguing that it be Y, but if it is Y, then Donald Trump seizes power with having netted a vast minority of the popular vote and ultimately a vast minority of the electoral vote as well, and that's troublesome. But the idea of floating the plan is not particularly troublesome to me because that's what people in that position will do, and it's in fact what I've done. But what's been really interesting is watching people like, I don't know. I didn't see him specifically do it because I don't pay any attention to what he does, but like, what's his name? From the Federalist, Sean whatever, who I don't, follow what he says anymore. But he's difficult to figure out because he's kind of a nincompoop. But anyway, he got himself hot under the collar some years ago when, for instance, I said, if you really push things to the max, do you remember the crazy plan? And it was, sort of an outlandish plan, for using the remaining time on the Obama administration, wherein Joe Biden would have been vice president and therefore president of the Senate, to halt proceedings on swearing-in day. That would be January 3rd, 2017. The incoming Trump administration and the incoming Republicans in Congress, wherein we would hold up their swearing in and use that momentary pause in between versions of the Senate to say, all right, well, terms have ended by constitutional strictures for X number of you, 1/3 of the Senate. You guys are out. 1/3 of the Senate is supposed to be sworn in 10 seconds, many of them returning members whose terms just ended, but to which they've been reelected to new terms. But freeze it in between and say, we actually have at the moment a 67 or 66 member Senate, and I'm the president of it. And before I swear anybody in, I wanted to make note of the fact that the guy who's still president, Barack Obama, has just sent me a written communication in which he has nominated Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. Or, that written notification has, of course, already been sent. But you could take that up on the floor. Or somebody else. Hillary Clinton has been nominated to the Supreme Court by Barack Obama, and we're going to consider that nomination. And then when we're done, I'll swear in the new guys. And, of course, everybody hit the roof. And, it's very audacious. And never has anything in the world been done quite like that. Well, not in this country anyway. I don't know about the world. But, under the same plan of, well, if it gets done without asking for permission and then it goes to the courts, would it be non-justiciable under the political question doctrine? That part of the plan is pretty much the same as the Eastman plan. So I'm not offended by his having offered the plan. I'm offended by the people he offered the plan on behalf of. I'm offended by John Eastman and his existence generally, and the wrongness with which he based his surety about the plan. But am I worried about floating a weird and esoteric plan that relies on the non-justiciability of rules decisions made inside the legislature? Not particularly, but for all the Federalist people who said, I'm crazy, but he's not, well, that I don't accept so much. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Not there on Netroots Radio so much as here. Okay. Anyway, I think I've probably covered about all I'm willing to do at the moment about the Eastman memo, though I could be convinced to return to the topic. But I think we actually got the point across. There's a couple of other things that I think are important and worthy of sharing, and I feel like there's no way to get through them all. Let's see. I mentioned, for instance, Facebook having a terrible week, but that feels like something that maybe we should dedicate Friday to. Perhaps that's when you could fit. I mean, you'll never fit all of these articles that I have, because some of them are from ProPublica, and you know how they do things. That takes like 4 hours to read through some of these. All right, let's see. Where do I want to begin with these things? All right, on a related note with respect to the Eastman memo, or rather, a note related in part to the Eastman memo. I should acknowledge this story, reported by the New York Times and everybody else, I think, at this point. Trump campaign knew lawyers' voting machine claims were baseless, memo shows. This is a totally different memo circulating in the crazy times of the crazy so-called administration under Donald Trump. Days before, lawyers allied with Donald Trump gave a news conference promoting election conspiracy theories. His campaign had determined that many of those claims were false, court filings reveal. Ordinarily, this would be something I would read through in total because it's important and interesting and revealing about the way the Trump administration worked. But because we have so many things to get to, I think really probably you read this yesterday, despite our not being on the air to discuss it. And the basics of it are, is, was, are, will be, I don't know what tense we're in here. But the crazy Kraken lawyers, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, though he says he wasn't involved in some of these things, Rudy Giuliani, a few others. Here, I think the picture includes Sidney Powell, but also there's Rudy, and what's the other one? The Jenna, was it Ellis? I don't remember. The crazy one who was previously the traffic court lawyer, but who somehow became a top campaign lawyer for Trump. Yes, the three of them heavily involved in this. But these were all the loony claims, including the looniest from Sidney Powell, that you remember Hugo Chavez and Venezuela somehow were involved in this plot, even though he'd been dead for years, to hack the election, and da-da-da-da-da. George Soros was in on it, and blah, blah, blah. Plus, Dominion voting machines were hacked and hackable, or were part of the plot, and that's what got the MyPillow guy and Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, et cetera, and Lynn Wood, who then tried to distance himself from it so that he wouldn't get sued by Dominion for millions of dollars for defamation. Seems to be working out pretty well, and it's going to cost them an awful lot. It's probably going to destroy Rudy Giuliani in the end. But all of those claims about the voting machines and the big conspiracy, well, we all knew that it was the big lie. But the important part of the story was that the Trump campaign internally also knew that ahead of time and did nothing to stop the lawyers from getting out there and saying these things in such a way that, some portion of the American electorate is going to believe it. Well, these are big, important lawyers for a big, important campaign. They wouldn't just get up there and make stuff up and lie, especially not if the campaign knew that it was untrue, because here in America, people in suits don't do those sorts of things. That's the big assumption that empowers the big lie. And then they all went ahead and decided it was okay to believe it. And as it turns out, it was all crap. So it's worth reading through the article, mostly to make sure that you get the names of all the players so that you know who should be tied up or thrown off a cliff or hanged. But in terms of the details, I think we probably have a pretty good view of the story already. You almost certainly read this thing. But I don't know. I may comb through it later on and see if there's more stuff to pull out of it. Related, I would share with you, let's see, there's writing on that weird nexus in between the big lie and the memo about the big lie and Eastman and all of these actors. Let's see, there's stuff from Greg Sargent, which is good on it. And I have this piece here from Mark Elias at his democracydocket.com, who proposes a legislative fix to plug the holes that Eastman thought he might exploit with his memo. It is time, he says, to protect the certification process. Well, let's see. It begins like this. In state after state, from Florida to Montana, and actually, before I go any further with this, I guess I should say, Mark is, I think, actually aiming less at Eastman and his memo than at the efforts in the several states, several Republican-controlled states, to manipulate the mechanics of how elections are conducted such that they can suppress the vote of people that they think are more prone to voting for Democratic candidates, right? So, in state after state, from Florida to Montana, Republican legislatures are enacting laws making voting more difficult. These laws, which often target minority and young voters, are a scourge on our democracy that threatens the right to vote in order to gain partisan electoral advantage. So that all sucks. Now, he didn't put that in there, but it does. But I don't think that's chiefly what he's focusing on. Though Congress has taken notice, progress has been difficult. While the House of Representatives passed the For the People Act, H.R. 1, which would preempt many of the worst of these new state laws, passing it in the closely divided Senate has so far proved more difficult. Additional legislation is also in the works, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would restore a critical portion of the Voting Rights Act that was struck down by the Supreme Court. While most of the legislative focus has been on the registration and voting process, Significantly less attention has been paid to another point of vulnerability in our election system: the rules for tabulating and certifying elections. That's Mark's specialty, of course. The right to vote is hollow if it does not include the right to have your vote counted, and if your candidate receives the highest number of votes, to have her assume the office to which she was elected. Republicans are taking aim at this vulnerability. Historically, the period between election night and inauguration day was celebrated as the peaceful transfer of power. Diligent election officials rechecking their math to ensure every lawful vote was accurately counted gave confidence to the public that elections were fair, free, and honest. While there have been occasional disputes in close elections, they have not centered on the election certification process. In his 2000 concession speech, Al Gore noted that, quote, other disputes have dragged on for weeks before reaching resolution, and each time both the victor and the vanquished have accepted the result peacefully and in the spirit of reconciliation. Not the Bill kind of reconciliation, but you know what I mean. Unfortunately, Donald Trump offered no similar words of reconciliation. Instead, Trump used the time when we have traditionally celebrated democracy to degrade it. In the days between November 3rd, 2020 and January 20th, 2021, and continuing ever since, he fought tooth and nail to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, including improperly pressuring those responsible for certifying elections to ignore their duty and count every vote. In Michigan, for example, Trump and his allies waged efforts to prevent Michigan from certifying its election results. First, there was a concerted effort to pressure the Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, remember them, not to certify the election results in the state's largest county and home to the city of Detroit. Initially, the two Republican members of the bipartisan four-person Michigan State Canvassing Board blocked a move to certify the votes, producing a party-line deadlock that Trump celebrated. Later that evening, after public pressure mounted, both Republican board members reversed their votes, and the election results were unanimously certified. Had the Republican members not reversed their votes, Michigan would have faced an unprecedented failure to certify its election results for president. When that effort failed, an intense campaign was aimed at the two Republican members of the four-person Michigan State Canvassing Board. In the end, one of the two Republican members succumbed to the pressure and refused to certify the results by abstaining. He flipped and flopped and flipped back again. Had he been joined by the other Republican member, Michigan would have again faced a failure to certify its election results for president. While these efforts did not succeed in 2020, there is no guarantee that they will fail again in the future. Since the violent insurrection on January 6th, Trump and his allies have turned their attention to the state processes that are used to certify election results. In a number of states, they are enacting laws and policies that weaken fair election administration and nonpartisan election certification. In Georgia, for example, a new law allows the state legislature to effectively control the counting and certification process, stripping the Secretary of State of some of his authority as retribution for his handling of the 2020 post-election and certification process. It is clear that we need new safeguards to ensure a fair counting of ballots and certification of the winner. Well, good, because here are three solutions. Number one, the powers of state officials in the certification process must be clearly defined and limited. State officials responsible for certifying federal elections should not be allowed to rely on any information other than the election returns themselves. The job of a state official reviewing election returns for certification is to make sure the math is correct, nothing more. A state official who fails to abide by their duty should be subject to immediate removal. 2. It is time to remove unnecessary steps in the certification process. With current technology, there is no longer reason for local boards of election to certify election results before passing them on to the state. While it may be charming, as he says, to have villages, towns, cities, and counties have a role in the process, our democracy can no longer afford to have these additional links in the certification chain. Once the local officials have completed their final counting, they should provide those results to the state official in charge of elections. Well, maybe. Third, Congress should abolish the requirements that a state's governor, secretary of state, or partisan election board issue and sign the final certificate of election. Congress should require, for federal elections at least, that states certify their elections via a 3-person certification commission that is comprised of the state's chief justice, not always a great addition, the justice who most often voted contrary to the chief justice in published decisions of the state Supreme Court during the year prior. It's a little complicated. And a third justice to be chosen by those 2 justices. This certification commission would be responsible for reviewing the results, tabulations, and underlying election records to ensure that the final certified results are accurate. The signatures of at least 2 of those commission members would be required on the certificate of election to have a binding effect. The solutions I propose will not solve every problem of election administration or post-election dispute. It won't, for example, address many of the shortcomings of the Electoral Count Act that addressed elsewhere in pocket today, including Congress's role in certifying presidential elections. Nor would it affect each House of Congress's unique authority to, quote, judge the elections, or to be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members. Nevertheless, these 3 steps to narrow, shorten, and depoliticize the election certification process will help ensure that the candidate who receives the most votes is declared and certified the winner. It will also help restore the confidence in our election system that Trump continues to attack. It's a good point, and we should definitely be looking into it. Let's see. I feel like somewhere in the towards the top of the pile here should be some writing I thought from Greg Sargent and the Plumb Line. Is this it? Perhaps this. Let's click through and yep, it's Plumb Line. Greg Sargent from day before yesterday. Opinion: ominous new details about Trump's coup attempt require Democrats to act. I think this one a little bit closer to the concerns raised over the Eastman memo. In case you need more evidence of how much damage keeping the filibuster might end up doing, add this to the list. It could make a future stolen presidential election more likely. This is thrust upon us by new revelations about the extent of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn his 2020 loss and by an important new paper by a leading legal scholar warning of future election subversion. Both should prompt new urgency among Democrats, but might not. The revelations come from the new book Peril by the Post's Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. That's where all the latest hot, juicy tips about how terrible Trump really was have been coming from. The headline: 2 GOP senators, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Mike Lee of Utah, took Trump's lies about election fraud seriously enough to devote real resources to vetting them. But for our purposes, the more important revelation involves how those lies were supposed to interlock with the broader scheme cooked up by Trump and his co-conspirators. The key takeaway: gaping holes in the Electoral Count Act. We know Armando would agree with that. The 1887 law that governs how Congress counts electoral college votes, where these gaping holes were central to the chances that their scheme might succeed. The book recounts that 4 days before January 6th, when Congress counts the electoral votes, Lee received a White House memo outlining how Vice President Pence could scuttle the process, according to a new Post piece about the book. And they're talking here about the Eastman memo, I believe. Because Republicans in several swing states had voted to send sham electors for Trump to Congress, it argued, Pence could simply set aside the actual electors from those states for President Biden. Both sets would be invalid, and Pence could count the remaining electors, designating Trump winner of a majority of them. The memo suggested this as a potential option, and it also suggested Pence could use objections by GOP lawmakers to Biden's electors to delay the process. The book reports that Pence explored this idea before rejecting it. Let's be clear. The fact that these ideas were considered this seriously was made possible in part by the absurd ambiguities of the Electoral Count Act, or ECA. First, because the ECA provides that a state can appoint new electors if the election, quote, failed, which is defined very vaguely. The idea was to use election fraud, quote unquote, election fraud lies to declare that popular voting, quote, failed to render a clear outcome. GOP legislatures could then appoint electors for Trump, regardless of their state's popular votes. Second, and that was on better ground than the idea that changing the mechanics of how an election was handled in a state was unconstitutional. That's just groundless. Second, because the ECA makes it easy for Congress to object to electors, only one lawmaker from each chamber can force votes on whether to count them. The idea was to get congressional Republicans to invalidate Biden's electors in key states. Trump would prevail with a majority of remaining electors. Third, because the ECA does not clearly define the vice president's role as president of the Senate as purely ceremonial, the idea was to get Pence to somehow rule in favor of the objections to electors, or at least to delay the count. That would either result in Trump prevailing with a majority of electors, or buy enough time for the GOP legislatures to send rogue electors. Remember, getting Pence to rig or delay the count was precisely what Trump incited the January 6th mob to accomplish. In a great new draft paper, election law scholar Richard Hasen warns that we face serious risk of election subversion or an actual stolen election. Hasen discusses reforms that could avert such scenarios, which will also be the topic of a conference on Friday. It's linked, if you want to watch the conference or whatever. In the last election, no GOP legislature appointed rogue electors. A majority of Congress voted to uphold Biden's electors, and Pence ultimately backed away from the plot. But some GOP legislators did consider this scheme. Around 150 congressional Republicans did vote to subvert Biden's electors, and Pence did explore the outer limits of what he might do for Trump. And if the GOP controls the House and the Senate on January 6, 2025, Congress can simply count rogue electors sent by a given state, or refuse to count the rightful ones. If Republicans control just the House, Congress might deadlock, prompting a contingent election in the House decided by state delegations, and the Republicans would win. Indeed, as Hasen notes, the scheme getting even this far shows we are vulnerable to future respectable bloodless coup. A respectable bloodless coup, one dependent upon technical legal arguments overcoming valid election results. Thus, or rather this, plus the fact that some Republican candidates are now campaigning on a vow to subvert future losses, requires cutting off these pathways. So, Hasen recommends dramatically raising the threshold for Congress to object to electors, rewriting rules to make frivolous objections harder, and defining failed elections as only resulting from natural disasters or terrorist attacks to forestall states sending rogue electors. Hasen also recommends mandating that states follow procedures making it harder to corrupt the appointment of electors. Other ECA reforms suggested by election experts include clarifying that Congress must count the state's legitimately determined electors and that the vice president has zero role in deciding disputes over the electoral count. Democrats should push for ECA reform, and I expect they will, but nothing will pass as long as the filibuster remains. Well, that's certainly a big problem. The window is closing, Hasen told me. The filibuster is the major impediment to Congress taking steps to avert a potential stolen election in 2024. Do Democrats grasp the true urgency of this? It's not clear that they do. And I think that's probably right. But, what can I tell you? That's something that we have argued here, not just on the show, but in writing and elsewhere around the internet for 15, 20 years, that essentially I keep looking for where I put this on Daily Kos, and I don't know, I have these clearer memories of this being the case, but maybe this was just advocacy elsewhere. But the idea that it really didn't matter what your issue was. It was that I was hoping to break down all these various issue silos, but whether you are chiefly motivated by the need to address climate change, or chiefly motivated by the need to address voting rights, or whatever it is, for that matter, import-export law, whatever it is you're interested in doing, the chief impediment to getting it done is the filibuster. And it really shouldn't matter what your issue is. That needs to be on your agenda. Filibuster reform needed to be part of your lobbying agenda, no matter where you came from or what you were trying to do. And the hope was that serious voices inside Washington, D.C., with suits and everything, people that senators are used to listening to because they tell them things like, you should vote in favor of this huge tax cut for my oil company, or whatever. Although they presumably are just fine with the way things are. But whoever's lobbying on whatever issue, you should be essentially prepared to say, and another thing, Senator, the filibuster is going to have to be reformed because we're never going to get this thing passed in the form it needs to be in as long as the filibuster stands in the way. So, I don't know. Somehow I'm not able to track down all the writing that I thought I had done on such a thing, but I have a feeling that a lot of it was discussion behind the scenes, emails, and instructional work when we were executing our campaign the first time around for filibuster reform. But it remains true, and good to see it reflected here. Okay, let's see. Other important stories that require sharing. There are many. Here's one that we could fit in probably inside the amount of time we've got before the break, because it's just small and dumb. Like Donald Trump, who's actually quite large, but as a human being goes, he's rather small. From Business Insider, and I don't think we get we do get the whole article. All right. Here's a rather pathetic story. I don't really know what motivated it, and it's something Trump cooked up for himself, and as usual, he thinks it's a huge flex, and he's, really laying one on. He's really going to do a number on Joe Biden with this, but actually, if you stand back and look at what he was proposing, it's actually, pretty pathetic. Trump floated the idea of repainting his private plane to look just like Air Force One as a way of taunting Biden. Book says, that's the headline over in Business Insider, and I'm guessing, is that book Bob Woodward and Robert Costa's book? Yes, it is. There's the answer. So some bullet points here that get the point across, although I always find that it's frustrating because then when we read the article, they repeat. So let me skip down to the article. Former President Donald Trump floated the idea of repainting his private Boeing 757 plane to resemble Air Force One and fly it around the country, quote, as a way of taunting, unquote, President Joe Biden, according to a new book. Again, it's just not clear to me how that taunts President Biden, who has, of course, the real Air Force One at his disposal. The reporters Bob Woodward and Robert Costa write in their forthcoming book, Peril, that Trump raised the idea to his golfing friends on at least one occasion. And of course, as you know, his golfing friends are all in the plane painting business. So it made sense to raise it. Obviously did not, but just another empty, weird boast by Trump that isn't even a boast. Insider obtained a copy of the book ahead of its September 21 release. I have a feeling that they're mailing them to anyone who asks, but okay. The American people love that plane, Trump said after one golf session, according to the book. I am thinking of getting it repainted, red, white, and blue, like Air Force One, the way I think Air Force One should look. Now that would be hilarious, because you remember that at some point he proposed a new paint job for the actual Air Force One, which most people would not recognize as Air Force One. Air Force One in its, what is that, baby blue, powder blue? I don't know how you describe the color. But Trump obviously thought that color was wimpy and girly somehow. And he wanted to have, more robust, bold, red, white, and blue color scheme, which makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, I'm surprised that wasn't the original paint scheme for Air Force One. But everyone knows the current paint scheme for Air Force One. So what would be really funny is he would have to end up painting his plane to look like that instead, if he really wanted to fool people or taunt Biden. But instead, he wants to go with his color scheme.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Woo! One more segment to go. I think I can hold out and finish things up. But yeah, I think it's becoming more obvious I'm struggling through this segment. But let me continue reading this Business Insider piece. I was commenting on how ridiculous the whole idea is, but it's complicated, this idea that Trump wanted to repaint his plane to look like Air Force One, except he wanted to repaint it to look like what he thought Air Force One should have been repainted to look like. And if he follows his own advice and paints the plane red, white, and blue the way he wanted it, everyone will say, what is that? It doesn't make any sense. I don't recognize it as Air Force One. But if he wants his thing to look like Air Force One so that he can taunt Biden, he's going to have to accept the paint scheme he never liked. That's pretty interesting. Anyway, also, I have some questions about how much of the design would he be allowed to copy, in fact. If he were, say, copying the current design for Air Force One, would there be any restrictions that would prevent him from painting it that color? Probably not. Any restrictions that would prevent him from putting the flag on the tail? No, of course not. All planes have, all American chartered, I guess registered planes have that. But would there be any problem with his putting the presidential seal on it? I imagine there would be, but he could probably forge something up that says former president of the United States on it and looks like the seal. What about painting United States of America across the body, along the body? I'm not 100% certain that there's anything that would prevent him from doing that. I don't think it's a very wise idea. And of course, everyone would know it's not Air Force One. And you couldn't use the call sign Air Force One. That would cause problems. I'm pretty sure they could prevent you from doing that. And of course, if there were, I guess if there's terrorists hanging around West Palm Beach Airport, they could potentially, I suppose, shoot down the fake Air Force One because it wouldn't have the electronic countermeasures that the actual Air Force One has got. But that could happen anyway. Anyway, the whole thing is just pretty revealing. One, in that it's not even a cohesive plan. Like, what color are you going to paint this thing? And if it's your colors, how is that going to taunt Biden? And if it's not your colors, how is that not just taunting yourself? I don't know. But this is really just a story about how, petty, childish, and crazy is Donald Trump and why we should never have taken him seriously and certainly shouldn't be doing so now. So where do we leave off? All right. The American people love that plane, he told his golfing buddies. I'm thinking of getting it repainted red, white, and blue, like Air Force One, the way I think Air Force One should look, which will defeat the purpose. Trump said the aesthetic of Air Force One was his, quote, brand. The author is right. Quoting Trump as saying, I don't do the corporate jet thing. I'm not going to show up in a little Gulfstream like a effing CEO, which really just means that the size of the plane is his brand more than anything else. Trump pushed to get the real Air Force One a makeover in red, white, and blue when he was president, with the Pentagon's February 2020 budget request for fiscal year 2021, including a proposed repainting of the plane. The authors of Peril also say in the book that Trump was obsessed with the cost, design, and aesthetics of the USS Gerald R. Ford, a naval aircraft carrier, and frequently lodged his complaints about it in meetings with top military officials, including General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the way to use the guy's time properly, is complain about what the boat looks like. These generals and admirals were horrible businessmen, Trump complained repeatedly, and particularly terrible at acquisition and deal-making on ships, ensuring the military was always being ripped off, the book adds. I was in the construction business, Trump told his military advisors in one meeting, according to the book, saying, I know about elevators and how they can break, quote, if water gets on them. So I'm not really sure exactly what he's talking about, but I think he's talking about the lift system that they use to bring planes, jets, and others, I guess, up from below decks to launch off of an aircraft carrier. They don't always store them on deck. And I guess that's sort of an elevator type system, but my guess is that one, it's not just a commercial elevator, and two, I don't know what the idea of elevators break when you get water on them, what that is supposed to mean. But I guess if you spray water on the internal mechanisms of a commercial elevator in a building, it causes problems. I'm not sure how often that happens, but my guess is that the lift equipment that they use on naval warships probably contemplates the mechanism getting wet from time to time. The whole ocean thing being a big deal for the Navy. But Trump is pretty sure that he knows about elevators and how they can break if water gets on them. Trump was particularly not a fan of the placement of the island, which I'm not sure, it is not described in this excerpt here what the island is, but I think it is talking about that mechanism by which they lift planes from below decks. He didn't like that it was put toward the rear of the ship somehow. Navy officials told Trump that the island was put toward the back to make it easier for pilots to land on it, the book says. It doesn't look right. I have an eye for aesthetics, Trump once told Milley, according to the book, before running his hands through his hair and joking, can't you tell? At least he made a joke out of it, but, I have an eye for aesthetics. Yeah, well, this isn't so much about aesthetics as it is making it easier for pilots to land their planes on an aircraft carrier, which is a hard thing to do, but necessary. Oh, yeah, well, to me, it's just aesthetics. Look at my hair. Shouldn't I design naval aircraft carriers? No, that is simply not the case. Okay, I just thought that was kind of a weird thing. And short item that I might be able to share with you pretty quickly. Let's see. Are there more complicated rules or stories out here? I have one about rules that Ira Goldman brought up the other day. Is this still relevant here? I guess so. As we find ourselves trying to work our way through reconciliation here, in what context did this come up? I can't recall now. But I think there was this idea. Oh, yes. There was the idea has resurfaced that Vice President Harris could and should, and this is, I guess, bookends for the Eastman memo about what the vice president's powers are. This one, I think, deals a little bit more with things that might actually fall under the abilities of, the contemplated powers of the vice president as president of the Senate. But the idea that the immigration provisions proposed by Democrats to be added to the reconciliation bill have met with initial rejection from the Senate Parliamentarian's office. We didn't get a chance to talk very much about that, even on Monday, when it was news. But this has prompted renewed calls for Vice President Harris to overrule the parliamentarian and ignore their advice and instead rule that the immigration provisions should be considered in order and do pass muster under the Byrd rule. However, it's complicated, and in the end, it's probably something you could engineer. But we should remind everybody that the operation doesn't end with the vice president saying, you know what, I rule the opposite. She has the ability to ignore the advice of the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian would say, if a point of order is raised against the immigration provisions during consideration of the reconciliation bill, I would advise the chair to rule to sustain the point of order and therefore strike the offending provisions from the reconciliation bill. And it's within the power of the vice president or anyone else in the chair, for that matter, to say, I reject the advice. I will rule against the point of order and say that the point of order is not well taken and that the language should not be stricken from the bill. But that's not the end of the inquiry, because, of course, it gives the frustrated parties the opportunity to say, well, I appeal the ruling of the chair. Or, somewhat more complicated, perhaps they could appeal the right or protest the right of the chair to simply make a contrary ruling, which, I think at that point they're probably not on very firm ground. The chair does make those sorts of rulings all the time, but they could instead simply appeal the ruling of the chair and say, we happen to know that the parliamentarian's office feels the opposite is true, and we know what advice you got, and we know that you threw it out, and that you are basing your assumption on either on nothing or something we feel is erroneous. And that comes to a vote. Now, again, it's complicated because we're in the reconciliation context. Things are complicated. But under normal procedure, if a point of order was raised against a provision of the bill, perhaps based on germaneness or something like that, which is essentially what the Byrd rule, it has its own definition of germaneness for, budgetary purposes. But if there was a non-germane provision of the bill that someone objected to and raised a point of order, and the parliamentarian ruled that it should be well taken and the offending portion should be stricken, and the occupant of the chair, vice president or otherwise, said, I disagree and I will accept it, and I think I will reject the point of order, there would be a vote on appealing the rule of the chair. And if a majority of the Senate voted to overturn the ruling of the chair, the original determination of the parliamentarian would likely prevail. That is, although I guess it wouldn't yet be on the record, but what would have happened would have been a point of order is raised, the chair says the point of order is not well taken and this provision will remain in the bill. But if a majority of the Senate disagrees and thinks it doesn't belong in there, and if you have Manchin and Sinema working with that Republican minority, that would be an effective majority. You'd hold a vote, and no matter what the vice president does or says, she ends up perhaps losing the vote, and the provisions are in the end stricken. But because this is in the context of reconciliation, there's a weird dynamic happening. Because of the way reconciliation works and because of the design, which is supposed to expedite consideration of the bill and subject it, well, one, prevent it from being subjected overall to the filibuster, but also basically reverse the protections of the filibuster and require a supermajority to do anything to derail the bill, because it's supposed to be getting expedited consideration under the Budget Act. What ends up happening is you could have Vice President Harris ignore the ruling of the parliamentarian, declare the point of order raised against the immigration provisions of the bill as not well taken, And a vote could be called on appealing the ruling of the chair, but because of the expediting rules, an appeal of the ruling of the chair on a point of order under the Byrd rule requires 60 votes to reject, to overturn the ruling of the chair, not a simple majority. Now, there's all sorts of, I guess, you could make all sorts of constitutional arguments along the lines of the nuclear/constitutional option that ought not to be the case. But to date, it always has been the case. So, in a weird way, the supermajority requirement works for this idea of engineering things up. Of course, it requires the vice president or anybody else in the chair to look at the provisions and disagree on substance with the parliamentarian. And the parliamentarian is pretty much right on substance. Quite honestly, ordinarily, immigration policy provisions don't belong in a reconciliation bill, generally speaking. And this would require somebody saying, well, yeah, but I don't care, and I will simply deny the plain fact that they don't fall under the usual strictures of the Byrd rule and just say that they do. And that's kind of an embarrassing position for fact-based people to put themselves in. But they might be convinced to do so. And if they did, and someone objected and appealed the ruling of the chair because it's in a reconciliation context, it might, yes, I think this is actually the case. It's very confusing because I'm so used to the rules of reconciliation working against us. But I believe that it would require 60 votes to overturn the ruling of the chair if the ruling were, well, facially, a facial rejection of the plain meaning reading that the parliamentarian has given it. It's not a great precedent, but it could be done. And like I said, it was a little bit confusing because I'm used to things breaking the other way on reconciliation. That the truth is that immigration didn't really belong in there. And so if the parliamentarian said that it didn't belong in there, but the chair ruled it's okay, ordinarily, the way things break in with the Byrd rule, you would think that it would take 60 votes to sustain this admittedly erroneous ruling from the chair. But in fact, it works the other way. So they might very well want to think about taking advantage of it. But, I don't know how interested they might be in doing that in the context of continuing outrage about the Eastman memo, for instance. It's a little unseemly. But Ira Goldman raises some other questions that might be of interest to the real parliamentary geeks who might be listening. He tweeted the other day his questions of the day. Question 1, may the chair decline to rule on a Byrd rule point of order at all, and instead, under Rule 20, submit it to the Senate? That would set up a majority vote instead. Now, I don't know why the chair in this instance would want to do that. I don't think it's actually very helpful for the proponents of the immigration provisions, so I don't think it's something Harris would want to do. But could it be done? Could the chair entertain a point of order and say, instead of my making the decision, why doesn't the Senate make the decision? And it's not clear that a chair occupant, a vice president or otherwise, couldn't do that. Question 2, if a Byrd rule point of order is submitted to the Senate under that procedure, how many votes are needed to sustain it and thereby strike the challenged provision? That is a good question too. And my guess is if decision is submitted to the Senate, I would imagine a majority would be enough to sustain it or, overturn it for that matter. So I don't know. Neither of these things have been done, of course, but it's something worth considering just theoretically. I don't think that there's any real reason for the Harris team to be thinking about, unless, let's see, if the chair were to decline to rule. Well, that's an interesting thing. So I suppose if maybe it is something for her to consider. If the parliamentarian says no to the immigration things, but Harris is reluctant to simply ignore that and overrule her, could she instead say, let's just have the Senate decide whether or not a point of order seeking to strike the immigration provisions is well taken? And if Manchin and Sinema, therefore, I guess the assumption is, well, if they could be convinced to vote that they could be convinced to vote to reject the point of order because it had been proposed by Republicans, say, and they weren't in the position of being asked by a vice president who had just ruled in contravention to the advice of the parliamentarian that the point of order was not taken, but were in fact being asked to determine the rules themselves, would they be more inclined to vote with their fellow Democrats and defeat the efforts of Republicans to exclude the immigration provisions? Well, they might join the Republicans if they were personally opposed to the immigration policy, but it's not entirely clear that that's the case. Maybe more so for Sinema than Manchin, but it's not entirely clear that they oppose it. But they are wedded, both of them, to the position that they want to honor the decisions of the parliamentarian. And I think as part of their reluctance to change the rules on the filibuster, they don't like when the rules are stood on their head. But what if the rule was submitted to them to decide? Could they be convinced to decide otherwise? If they're not personally opposed to the immigration provisions, maybe so. But I don't know how they feel about those things. No one has asked. All right. Let's see. A couple of other crazy things to share, and there's lots of them, but running out of time and running out of energy and ability to read all of these things to you. But let's see. Where should we go next? How about this one? A quick update on what's going on in the Arizona fraud from the HuffPost. Mary Pappenfuss bringing us this news. It gets crazier and crazier over there. Renegade cyber ninjas brazenly defies Senate demand for records in Arizona fraud. What is going on out there? The Arizona State Senate and the company it hired are now at loggerheads over records the cyber ninjas company is not releasing after a court order. So it's getting kind of hairy out there. The Cyber Ninjas company in charge of the hugely controversial vote audit in Arizona is brazenly defying a demand to release all records regarding its operation and communications. And I just figured at some point the Arizona State Senate would lose interest in how they were doing things because it would look bad for them if they looked into how they were doing things. But apparently enough of them are actually interested in being able to answer questions about how things are going and how things work and are embarrassed at just covering it all up that it has now become a problem. The Arizona Supreme Court earlier this week left in place rulings from two lower courts ordering the state Senate and the company it hired to release all records concerning its widely derided audit of 2.1 million Maricopa County ballots. The presidential election ballots have already been certified multiple times by actual election officials. Records regarding a very public concern commissioned by the state Senate, regarding a very public concern commissioned by the state Senate cannot dodge public records law simply because they're held by a private company, the courts ruled in suit for access to records by good government group American Oversight and the Arizona Republic. The Arizona law does not allow public servants to outsource democracy and shroud their conduct in secrecy, Austin Evers, executive director of American Oversight, said after the decision. But now, Cyber Ninjas is blatantly defying the order, placing the state Senate in legal trouble. The state Senate's attorney has informed the company that its refusal to turn over the court-ordered records jeopardizes the Senate's ability to comply with the Court of Appeals order. The interests of the Senate and Cyber Ninjas have now diverged. Attorney Corey Langhofer warned Cyber Ninjas attorney Jack Wilenchik, the Arizona Mirror reported. The Senate will not support or advance any legal claim, defense, or position espoused by CNI, that's the Cyber Ninjas group, I guess Cyber Ninjas Incorporated, that has the effect of limiting or delaying CNI's compliance with the Senate's September 14th request, Langhofer informed Wilenchik in a letter. The Ninjas are refusing to turn over staffing records, internal communications, and communications with its subcontractors. To do so would not be, quote, practical, workable, fair, or legal, according to them, and would create an, quote, unsettling precedent for other contractors who work with the government, Wilenchik insisted in an email Friday to Langhofer. In a voluntary show of goodwill, however, it will provide financial statements concerning the audit, communications with the Senate, which the Senate already has, and updated policies and procedures used by subcontractors, noted Wilenchik. Late last month, on a court-ordered deadline, the Senate released tens of thousands of records already in its possession, with many of them revealing the extremely partisan nature of the operation. Records revealed that the operation has been bankrolled by groups headed by former President Donald Trump's ousted national security advisor and notorious spy, I would add, Michael Flynn, nearly $1 million somehow. Conspiracy lawyer Sidney Powell, who somehow gathered and turned over $550,000 for this effort, and 2 correspondents from One America News Network. Wow, $605,000, who gushed about the audit operation while paying for it. I mean, whatever. I don't even know what to say about that. The Ninjas company has vowed to finally release a report of its ballot findings next Friday. So I guess that would be this coming Friday. After several missed deadlines, it was initially supposed to report in mid-May. What's the date on this piece here? So 9/18. So yeah, I guess this Friday is their latest. But then they'll get around to it. 2 weeks, very soon, or some other short amount of time, I'm sure. The audit, in quotes, triggered suspicion right from the start. The head of the company predicted months before it even began that hundreds of thousands of votes would inevitably be found for Trump. Ballots have even been examined for traces of bamboo in a bizarre bid to prove the Chinese hacked the votes. And truckloads of voter data were spirited away to a cabin in the Montana woods. Remember that one? 1,300 miles from where those votes were cast. The Arizona vote was certified nearly 9 months ago by Republican Governor Doug Ducey after several official recounts failed to find any irregularities. Biden beat Trump by 10,457 votes in the state, edging out Trump by more than 2 percentage points, about 45,000 votes in Maricopa County. But here they are, fighting it out nonetheless. Okay. Well, we've just about neared the end of our show for today. Whoops, okay. I've somehow clicked into a totally different story here, but we're out of time for reading new stuff to you. And here we are with the opportunity to tell you all about what would be coming up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, except, well, you know, Justice himself still feeling under the weather, so substitute material following our show today. So, too bad. Of course, today is the day that I could read the whole thing at a leisurely pace, but I don't know how much more I'd be able to read through any of this stuff anyway. Clearly, voice and energy levels failing, but I think we've made it through to the end here today, and with a day of rest ahead of me and some saltwater gargling and whatever else, and none of the ivermectin stuff, as far as I know. Anyway, plan for today. Maybe we can recover well enough and come back strong for tomorrow. Anyway, lots more to go over here. We haven't even talked yet about the weird and somewhat mysterious indictments coming from the Durham investigation. Remember the John Durham investigation commissioned by William Barr while he was still Attorney General. Apparently he's decided to indict someone, and I guess Republicans have decided that this vindicates their whole accusation that the Trump-Russia connections were all made up, except it doesn't appear to have anything whatsoever to do with any of that. That plus more, of course, up in New York, where the indicted Trump Organization's CFO, Alan Weisselberg, still in trouble and still in court. He says that they expect to see even more indictments, I guess, of other Trump Organization figures in the near future as that court case continues. Lots to look in on in the rest of the week.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, that about wraps it up for today. I'm surprised I managed to make it all the way to the end. Thanks to Greg Dworkin for carrying us through the first hour. And we'll see whether he can manage a successful first hour tomorrow as well, and whether I'm up to broadcasting for the rest of it. And Friday, big question mark at this point, but we'll see.